any person who would attempt to rush into a ballroom and murder somebody who shares no ideology with me, period.
If you believe that Elon Musk is giving a Hitler salute on national television, why do you think people are going to call for his or feel like it's justified to take him out?
I believe Donald Trump is a fascist. I have no problems with saying that, and I think that Donald Trump.
I don't think you know what fascism is, yet you claim that Trump is a fascist.
Well, I don't think that's right. If the modern day Republican Party doesn't want to be called fascist, they could stop doing fascist things like going after their political opponents.
And those are the scenarios where people do go to violence. So I understand what Warren's saying about not throwing that around lightly. All right, joining me now, we've got the YouTuber Warren Smith and the Democratic strategist and political commentator Mike Nellis. Guys, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us, Brad.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So obviously, the big story of the week is the White House Correspondents' Dinner shooting. It's the third attempted apparent assassination attempt against President Trump. And it comes in the context of rising political violence and sentiment that frankly have people pointing fingers and kind of doing a blame game. We're going to get into some of the data and maybe which side is more to blame or whatnot. But first, hopefully we can just start on a point of agreement. Political violence really has no place in a free democratic society, and I think it's a cancer. Mike, your big picture take.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. Like, we've got huge disagreements in this country, and I think people haven't been this far apart in quite a while in American politics, but we shouldn't be solving it at the end of a gun. And I think what this guy did was crazy. And same with Butler, same with what happened to Melissa Hortman and a whole bunch of others. Charlie Kirk is I think still the most traumatic example of this happening. I think it was more traumatic than what happened at Butler, frankly, even if I didn't agree with Charlie Kirk on much. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to try to do a better job with our language while also being able to speak truth about our criticisms of each other without suppressing each other's right to free speech and being critical of the administration.
Yeah. Warren, your take.
I would just agree with that. I don't have anything to add.
Yeah. I mean, the unfortunate thing is not everyone would. And you would think that people in our business, right, who speak for a living and who give opinions for a living would get it, that's kind of the lifeblood of democracy or any sort of liberal free society in a broad sense. But the number of people who were like professional political commentators or pundits who were cheering on a Charlie Kirk attempt or a President Trump attempt, I'm not sure people have fully thought through the ramifications of that. It's like we're either going to live somewhere where people can advocate for what they believe in peacefully and we settle it amicably, or we're not. And if we're not, it's going to get ugly for everyone. I guess this brings us to maybe our first possible point of contention. Warren, when you look at political violence right now, do you see it as more of a left or right-wing phenomenon?
Well, if we're tracing actual people, try and counter this by pointing to January 6th, which I can understand why they do that, though the only person that was killed that day was one of the, we'll call them rioter, though you could call that violence against the officers there. I do think there is a discrepancy in the results we're seeing. If we're trying to be, I don't think it's unfair to say there does seem to be, but a discrepancy. But the president in office is Republican, so the pushback is going to be towards him. Would you disagree with that, Mike?
I mean, I would say the number one thing just at the top, I really hate the stupid, like, who's more responsible, left or right conversation, because I think we're all responsible for this. And that goes the president of the United States down to the three of us. And if you look at like the numbers and like, obviously, like if you go on, I was just on Newsmax not long ago before doing this, like they were showing me some numbers from YouGov that were showing that young liberals are more prone to violence than young conservatives, which I think that's one snapshot in time, like any poll. But like Cato Institute will show you that, like, I think 55% or something similar to that is right-wing violence when you tally up politically motivated murders compared to something like 25% of left. But I think you can play that numbers game all you want. But there's a rise of violence in America, period. And then there's a rise of political violence here. And I think we've seen, like, Charlie Kirk was assassinated. We saw Melissa Hortman being assassinated. I think we've all got a responsibility to deal with that. And what sucks about this moment in time that we live in is the incentive structures are all completely broken. And if you look at what happened Saturday night, we found out there was some kind of incident. We didn't know what had happened. And a bunch of people on my side decided that it was a staged event, that Donald Trump was trying to increase his poll numbers, that we were having some kind of, Nazi Germany moment. And it was really stupid. It was just really stupid. And I've been doing a lot of pushback against my own people to be, don't assume that everything's staged, don't pollute people's minds like that. But then the flip side of that was all the MAGA influencers in their Signal chat that they were in, they got an update that they were supposed to be pushing to sell the ballroom and attack Jimmy Kimmel. And I just don't understand what we're doing anymore.
Well, we'll come to Jimmy Kimmel and some of that stuff. But your point is taken that the ballroom message went out. Though I do understand the idea of wanting a secure location to host events. And I'm not necessarily dead set against the ballroom, but it was a bit tone deaf to seize on it. Hey guys, cutting in here to remind you to subscribe to this channel if you want to see more intense political panels with big voices from the online left and the online right, and to hit the like button if you're enjoying the conversation, or really, even if you're not enjoying it and you're just suffering a little bit through it, you could still hit that like button and do comment with your thoughts, but also let me know who else you want to see on the panel. Drop the names in the comments. I'll be sure to take a look. Now let's get back into our conversation. Here's the thing, Mike. I agree with you that the numbers historically have shown more right-wing violence or right-wing political violence. So, for example, we do have one data site that gets cited is the Cato Institute that you just talked about, which is not a left-wing think tank. It's a libertarian think tank. Yeah. But their numbers, it's like, again, however you calculate this, it's going to be misleading. They're only calculating deaths. So their numbers don't even pick up the assassination attempts against President Trump. They don't even measure that. They other ones like the Center for Strategic and International Studies show historically more right-wing attacks. But then as of 2025, it crosses over and you have more left-wing attacks. I think the counting up the numbers seems to me to be very difficult to do in a way that doesn't end up biased in one direction or the other. I do see, though, more sentiment on the left, broadly defined, that is violent or in favor of assassinations, right? You look at the YouGov polling you mentioned, which I could put on screen here. Most Americans across the political spectrum say political violence is never justified, but younger and more liberal Americans are more likely to disagree. Rutgers and the Network Contagion Research Institute actually found that self-identified left-of-center respondents, 50 and 56% respectively, thought the murder of Elon Musk and President Trump could be at least somewhat justified. I don't know how much time you spend online, because I think there's a divide between online and the real-world politicians. You don't have Democratic members of Congress coming out here and saying, kill Elon Musk. But when I open up my TikTok feed, I see progressives constantly saying, somebody needs to do it. Somebody needs to do it. And they've got 100,000 likes. I mean, do you not acknowledge that as a rising phenomenon on the progressive base, Mike?
I mean, you see it from some people in some corners of the internet, and you saw that with the Charlie Kirk stuff too. There were a lot of people who were celebrating his assassination, and I called that out at the time for what it was, which I think it was wrong. You should just never celebrate anybody's death, period, whether it's that or like Trump celebrating the Mueller death. I thought was gross too, not to both sides it for a second. But I do think there's some of that, but there's also, I think to me, there's a huge gap between some, am I allowed to curse on here, Brad? I don't want to get you in trouble.
You can say whatever you want.
Perfect. Like some jackass on the internet who has, whatever, 1 million TikTok followers saying something is different to me than the president of the United States calling his opponents traitors and retweeting stuff on True Social about they should be hung. Like he posted something that was like George Washington would hang these people for what they've done. Like there's just a gap in that. And then to the point that Warren made earlier, and I just want to dovetail into this a little bit. Actually, I'm going to address something you just said, Brad, which is, the ideology of some of these folks who do this, like the 3 attempts on Trump. Like none of the ideologies are consistent when you look at these people. They've gone down deep rabbit holes and they're kind of all over the place.
Most of them are crazy, right?
Most of them are right. They're crazy, period. And so they're all over the place. And that's why I think the actual factors that lead to political violence are greater than the rhetoric from Hakeem Jeffries and Donald Trump. It's the crazy people are doing crazy stuff, easy access to guns, no mental health care infrastructure in the country, and then a generation of lonely, isolated young men who spend all of their time playing video games and hanging out on social media without any real in-person connection. I think that's the actual problem here. It's not that like my rhetoric or your rhetoric or Warren's rhetoric is causing it. It's that they're just latching on to stuff. And I think that's an issue. It also makes it hard because, like, for instance, the guy who tried to assassinate Trump at Mar-a-Lago, he was all down the rabbit hole on like right-wing Epstein like anti-Epstein stuff on Trump. And so it was just kind of weird. And the guy who killed Charlie Kirk was like half a groyper, not like a full groyper. I know some people like ran with that on my side that should not have, but there's just some weird stuff when you get into their ideologies. I just don't
even
think it's consistent.
the horrific guy who killed Melissa Hortman and those Democratic lawmakers, he was a Trump supporter and pro-life, but also thought Tim Walz told him to do it. Like, these people are crazy and hard to pin down. Warren, I want to bring you back in the conversation here. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think that this guy was crazy. He was functioning as a teacher. He seemed to have from what we've heard,
the latest shooter from the White House Correspondents'
latest shooter.
Center. Yeah. Well, you're right. He seemed to have a more normie-ish political take.
Yeah, his manifesto lays out his ideology clearly, and I would argue that it's coherent with a lot of mainstream, we'll call it leftist messaging right now. And we're talking about this disparity and why we're seeing the rise coming from, I would argue, one direction. I think it goes to the underlying dynamics and ideology. If you believe that Elon Musk is giving a Hitler salute on national television, why do you think people are going to call for his, or feel like it's justified to take him out? If you believe we are in a Hitler moment, as was just referred to a moment ago, I wouldn't be surprised if you talking about the leftist ideas underlying this.
I'm sorry, Warren. Are you implying that I suggested that we're living in a Hitler moment? Because I don't think I said anything like that.
I don't remember who mentioned it, but I just remember someone describing like how the conversation around describing this as.
Got
it. It might have been Brad too. Someone described. Well, would you deny there are people out there that are fearful that Trump is fascist?
Well, I mean, I believe Donald Trump is a fascist. I have no problems with saying that, and I think that Donald Trump I mean, you can rest your case all you want, but Donald Trump governs as a fascist, and I think it's not wrong to say that when Trump abuses the power of the federal government to go after people that he doesn't like. I mean, moments before
what
we
is
started
fascism?
Fascism to me in this instance would be abusing the federal government to go after your political opponents.
That's fascism, abusing the federal government?
Yeah, I think you might be equating fascism with Nazism. Okay, give me your definition of fascism. Then.
Fascism was invented by Giovanni Gentile in Italy, describing where the head is conjoined with the body, the state. It also derives from actualism, this psychological. It is difficult to define, but that's one reason why it shouldn't be thrown around so loosely.
Well,
it means something very specific. You're right. If I could just finish?
Go ahead.
You're right that there is a big difference between Nazism and fascism. The Nazis took fascism and turned it into something very different. So when we're talking about fascism today, many people that throw it around, what they're actually describing, what they think they're describing, is actually Nazism. But I don't think you know what fascism is, yet you claim that Trump is a fascist.
Well, I don't think that's right, and I think you're maybe a little bit.
So what is fascism?
So to me, it would be one political party trying to create a one-party state and then abusing its power to do so. And I'm sure you could poke holes in that all that you want, but I think that's a common definition of fascism that people accept. And if you look at what a fascist dictator would do in countries, it would be somewhat similar to what Donald Trump does. And so if the modern day Republican Party doesn't want to be called fascist, they could stop doing fascist things like going after their political opponents. Look, they're abusing the power of the FCC right now to try to get Jimmy Kimmel taken off the air because of a joke he made a couple days ago that Donald Trump doesn't like. They indicted James Comey again earlier today. I mean, it is. That's an abuse of power, and that's how I see it.
You can call it an abuse of power, but that's not fascism.
I mean, you could feel however you want about it, Warren, but that's how I view it. It's the same thing as like,
so
right now,
guys, let me just hop in here for a second and say, Mike, obviously everything is a gradation, right? Like something can be in a more authoritarian direction without being full fascist. And what you've described, I think many of them are abuses of power, but you do acknowledge that Trump is still ultimately operating within the constraints of our constitutional republic, right? He is ultimately obeying Supreme Court orders. Even what you're describing as prosecuting his political opponents, he is going through the process of securing an indictment, bringing a case before a jury. And that's why, frankly, when it is bullshit, it is falling apart. So I think the problem with throwing around fascist, authoritarian, is it suggests something where you have a kind of scenario where like he's made himself a king and he's no longer going to respect any sort of check or balance or anything. And those are the scenarios where people do go to violence. So I understand what Warren's saying about not throwing that around lightly. At the same time, though, I would agree, simply calling someone a fascist is not the same thing as saying, go kill that person. Mike, so your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think I didn't say he was a successful fascist. I didn't say he was a successful authoritarianism. Like the system itself is by and large holding up, but he is somebody who is testing the bounds of his power, unlike any president that we've seen in my lifetime, and pushes that boundary as much as he can. Like there's an old Roman expression that's, we thought the walls were made of stone and it turns out they were made of paper. And I think we learn more and more what parts of our democracy work on stone and what parts of it work with paper every single day. And I just think that's, just because he's not successful at it doesn't mean that he isn't trying to be that or is that. And so to me is like, he is a very problematic leader for that reason. And the point I was going to make before is all the MAGA influencers right now are all over X, and they're picking apart the shooter's manifesto, which I do think the shooter was crazy. If you read large parts of it, like there are some things that he says, like, I have blood on my hands with a president who is like this or blah, blah, blah. And like any person who would attempt to rush into a ballroom and murder somebody shares no ideology with me, period, because that's not something that I would ever do or advocate for. But I think that there's like a working the refs thing that MAGA influencers do, and that you see it right now is that in the manifesto, the guy says, there are people who run our government who are pedophiles, rapists, and traitors. And then the MAGA right goes, well, you've been calling Donald Trump a pedophile protector over the Epstein files. Stop talking about the Epstein files. Well, no, I'm not going to do that because they've refused to be honest and transparent about that. And at a minimum, it's reasonable for the American people to question what Donald Trump may or may not have done with Jeffrey Epstein, what he's covering up with that. Same is true for the word rapist, which is not a word that I throw around lightly, period. But in the case with Megyn Kelly, he was found liable for her sexual assault in order to pay $80 million. So my thing is it reasonable for the American people sitting at home with the information that they have to think that their president might be a pedophile or a protector or a rapist? Yeah, it is, based on the information that we have.
Well, I think there's a huge discrepancy between somebody covering up for pedophiles or a literal pedophile himself. And I'm not aware of any actual evidence that Donald Trump is
There's a couple of credible allegations that are out there, not to mention the fact that when he was on Howard Stern, he was talking about, well, how young is too young for you? And he was like 14, they were yucking it up. So
that
to
was
me,
a creepy joke, though.
When is it a joke and when is it not a joke with that guy? I don't know. So again, my thing about it is I don't know if Donald Trump is a pedophile or not. Again, I don't throw that stuff around. I know that he's protecting them in the Epstein files, though. To me, that's just as bad. So
I want to give Warren a chance to respond to that.
No, you just did throw it. Sorry, you just did throw it around. Yeah, like,
well, no, I asked if it was reasonable for somebody to think that he may be, and I think that is reasonable with the information we have about him.
Okay, so you do think it's reasonable to call him a pedophile? So you are throwing it around. So don't be surprised.
I'm not throwing it around. I'm saying with what we know about this president and what we don't know because they refused to release the Epstein files, it's reasonable for a lot of people to feel that way. If you don't, that's fine. It's reasonable for you to not feel that way. But what's not reasonable is using a gun to try to execute the president of the United States.
Well, I think we agree on that.
The president of the United States is having sex with children, or you're surprised people try and kill him?
I mean, he was palling around with a known sexual predator.
So why are you?
And has lied about his relationship with it, so it's reasonable for somebody to think that. Well, Warren, what's your justification then for why they're not releasing the files? Why are they not releasing the files? What are they hiding?
I don't know, man, but what does that have to do with what I'm talking about?
Well, because we're having a conversation about whether it's reasonable to suspect that the president of the United States may have been complicit.
We're having a conversation about why people are trying to kill the president and the role of the underlying ideology. That's what we're talking about.
Right, and I'm defining why I think it's reasonable for somebody to think that. So I don't understand what your objection
to think what is. To take out the president.
To question if the president of the United States is a pedophile or a rapist.
You can question that for sure. I agree.
Sure.
That's always question things, but
right.
You think that's different than saying you think Donald Trump is a pedophile.
Well, I don't know because I don't know what I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
I think my question that I'm articulating here is, like, right now, all the MAGA influencers are saying that Thomas Massie and the Democrats are responsible for this assation attempt for trying to investigate and release the Epstein files.
You're talking to me. I don't know. That's not how the world works. All the MAGA influencers don't say one.
I'm not saying that you are, Warren. I'm redefining my point because it seems like you missed it. Is that there's a lot of people out there who are saying that I should no longer be allowed to talk about the Epstein files and criticize the president for this cover up because it's inspiring the shooter to do that. Now, I haven't said anything violent here. I haven't said anything violent online. If I have in the past, I'd be happy to reflect on it. But I do think it's reasonable for the American people to have questions about that. And the idea that we're going to stop criticizing the president here because something unfortunate happened, which should not happen, and we should condemn it, is ridiculous. And it's an example of the MAGA influencers working the refs. I'm not accusing you of doing that, Warren, because I don't know you. I have not engaged with your content before. So I don't know what type of creator you are. And I'm not going to put words in your mouth. But that's what's happening right now online.
Okay.
So, Mike, I guess I would say, though, is there is a line where you accuse somebody of heinous enough things that we all know what most people think should be done to pedophiles, right? To rapists. And it's not something nice. So in the absence of any criminal charge against the president for such a thing, any named accuser, and now I agree with you, E. Jean Carroll, that's a different case, but I'm talking specifically about the pedophilia accusations.
Sure.
I think that's probably the most heinous thing you could accuse a person of. Like, I would rather be accused of murder than that.
Same.
And so I do think that in the Epstein files debate, Democrats and progressives have been far too quick to throw that word around in a way that it doesn't mean you're therefore responsible if some person tries to kill someone and thinks he is a pedophile, but it is reckless and does contribute to an out-of-control political environment.
Maybe, but I think the bigger problem remains that this administration has not been transparent about this. Like they had their opportunity to do this right. And I will remind you that for the years leading up to Donald Trump's reelection here, they promised to release the Epstein files.
True.
They elevated this as a political issue. And frankly, Democrats downplayed it, to be honest with you, because Democrats also have a bunch of people that are in the Epstein files. So to me, it's they created the terrain for that conversation. And then they thought they'd be able to get away with covering it up in the middle of the July 4th holiday, which was tremendously stupid political decision on their part, in my opinion. And then Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie ran with it. So my thing is we're living through this really strange age with a complete and total lack of accountability in America today for seemingly anybody who knows the right person or has enough money to buy themselves a pardon. And I think the average American gets really frustrated with that. And it's why you see people throw those words around. And if you watch my content, I'm not going around calling Trump a pedo all the time. I'm just saying, like, I have questions. Those questions are not answered. I will say at a minimum, I believe he's protecting pedophiles in the Epstein files. Like, that is, I think at this point, undeniable from my point of view. But I think people can be more careful with their language. But the real problem here is, again, easy access to weapons, lack of mental health care infrastructure, lonely, isolated men. I don't think the things that create the three attempts on Trump's life, with maybe the exception of Butler, because that's just a very odd case that, like, we still don't have, frankly, enough information about. But the primary factors that lead into it are really not that different than the primary factors that lead into a school shooting. It's almost always like a young, isolated man, access to a weapon, no support. There were a million signs before it. And the more you dive deeper into it, they seem to be very similar. We're also only 72 hours removed from whatever happened Saturday night. So we don't know enough about this guy. It may have been he was perfectly normal, and then over the last year, his mental health deteriorated for one reason or another. So again, I always tell people, like, wait to see what the facts are.
Yeah, that is true. And I like, for example, I saw you posted a tweet that was like, wait to tweet about the event, because people were posting the shooter's been killed, like all this stuff that was just flooding out. I always try to wait until I actually am able to sit down and read stuff. Warren, before I shift us along to kind of the next angle here, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on anything.
Yeah, I wouldn't compare it to I wouldn't compare it to school shootings at all, because again, this goes to the underlying political ideologies that are going to motivate actions like this largely. Yes, you could have someone what is a school shooting is often motivated by shaking your fist at the world, feeling like everything's hopeless. It's completely different than feeling like I have a responsibility and a duty to improve the world by taking out this political figure. I'm not sure how we can compare the two.
I mean, I think that sense of hopelessness that people feel that leads them to stuff like this is very similar. Again, they latch on to something. Usually there's like a conspiracy theory or there's a resentment towards one individual person. Like, I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. There was a shooting of the principal at the high school down the street from where I live, not where I went to high school. But he had a perceived slight against them, kind of snapped, went in and shot the principal at point blank range, killed the vice principal. He actually lived, I think, believe it or not. And I was across the street when it happened. I'll never forget seeing like all the cop cars that came. So to me, I just don't think those things are they different? Yeah, but I don't think they're that different. Like, we have a problem in this country, and I think and I appreciate this conversation because it's like civil and reasonable, even if we disagree, is like online, there's no conversation about gun violence, mental health, why these things keep happening. It's all just like a stupid gotcha game about, did you use this term? Did you use that term? Oh my God, you're responsible for this. It's just dumb.
Well, I think I think people are ultimately responsible for their own actions. So the shooter is responsible for the shooter. We can have a conversation about whether like specific rhetoric should be toned down. But I will say, Mike, I have come up over the last decade in politics in an era where liberal-leaning media and Democratic politicians were the first ones to say that others have blood on their hands for the actions of others, right? If there was like a racist hate shooting, right? They'd come out and list the influencers they thought had blood on their hands. If there was a shooting, they'd go and say that the politicians who vote against gun control have blood on their hands, rather than a good faith disagreement about what legislation will increase public safety. So I have always been on the team. The person who has blood on their hands is the person who did the killing, and everyone else is ultimately not responsible for it. But it is interesting to hear Democratic influencers and commentators and officials suddenly totally rejecting the idea of like collectivizing guilt or kind of guilt by association or influence. It does seem like a bit of a 180.
I mean, yes and no. I think that Democrats do try to think that they can shame people into doing whatever they want, and that has been an issue for us in the past. And I think if you look at, I didn't like a lot of the way that the Harris campaign and its allies were trying to shame men into supporting Kamala Harris to support their wives' abortion rights instead of producing content that would explain to them why voting for Kamala Harris was in their best interest. Like, it's a longstanding thing with the Democratic Party. Can't focus in on people's individual self-interest, and the Republicans are, in my opinion, much better at that politically in election time. Maybe not right now while they're so focused on the damn ballroom. But I do think we all have a responsibility here. And we've all got to try to do better. And we've also been dealing with, for a minimum 10 years, if not much longer than that, just like generations of politicians that haven't actively addressed serious issues in this country. Like, the economy is a disaster right now. It was a disaster before Donald Trump took office. It's worse now, in my opinion. We have not done anything about gun violence in America, and it's only accelerating. So to me, we're still really owning up to the inaction on so many different issues. Like, imagine if we had a real mental health care infrastructure in this country instead of just, you can get access to BetterHelp if you need it. That's about it. This podcast
this
sponsored by BetterHelp,
segment
Brad.
is sponsored by, no, just kidding.
We went for the same joke, Brad.
Yeah. So I want to bring in what Karoline Leavitt said, because I found myself simultaneously kind of agreeing with her, but also pulling my hair out at the elephant in the room. Here's what White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt had to say, where she shamed Democrats for their extreme rhetoric after the White House Correspondents' Dinner shooting. Take a listen to this.
It's not just the media, it is the entire Democrat Party has made their pitch to voters across the country that Donald Trump poses an existential threat to democracy, that he is a fascist, and that they compare him to Hitler. I mean, these are despicable statements that the American people have been consuming for years. And so many mentally perturbed individuals are led to believe these words are truth and then are inspired to act on it. I have a whole host of examples that we can share with you after. It is pages and pages of major Democrat Party elected officials saying, such as Rep. Hakeem Jeffries just this month said, "We are in an era of maximum warfare everywhere all the time." Governor Josh Shapiro said heads need to roll within the administration. Senator Alex Padilla said people are, quote, dying because of fear and terror caused by the Trump administration. These are Democrat elected officials calling for war against the president of the United States and his supporters. I could go on and on, but again, when you have people in positions of power that are saying things like this every single day for years, you are inspiring violence by people who are already mentally ill. And that's what we've seen against this president for far too long.
So there's a lot to unpack about that clip. For example, the heads will roll thing is just a phrase that refers to firing people, not an incitement of violence. But I think it's true that the Democrats have said very, very drastic things about President Trump, and I would like them to rein in some of that rhetoric. But the elephant in the room here is, of course, the president himself. Listen to this compilation that's floating around liberal Twitter of some of President Trump's sweetest nothings he has whispered into the ears of his political opponents. Listen to this.
President Donald Trump took to Truth Social, branding Arizona Senator Mark Kelly and 5 other congressional Democrats as traitors who deserve the death penalty.
Over the weekend, Trump effectively said that Milley should be executed for treason.
The president reacting to Mueller's death on Truth Social, saying, "I'm glad he's dead."
Knock the crap out of him, would you? I will pay for the legal fees. If I say don't hurt him, then the press says, well, Trump isn't as tough as he used to be.
President Trump is responding to Rob Reiner's death, posting on Truth Social. Reiner's death was due to, quote, the anger he caused others through his massive, unyielding, and incurable affliction with a mind-crippling disease known as Trump derangement syndrome.
The former president posted this photo of himself getting ready to swing a baseball bat next to a photo of Bragg. Today, Bragg's office received a package containing white powder and a threatening note.
I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. Like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
So, Warren, I'll come to you on this, but I simultaneously do agree that Democrats should stop crying fascism, Hitler, Nazi, but also it's kind of tone deaf to make that request at the same time that President Trump retweets posts saying Democrats should be hung for treason and calls them traitors. And I think he's even used the word fascist about them, ironically enough. What's your reaction to all of this?
Yeah, he has made many flawed statements. I don't think there's anyone who would deny that, but because I do this full time with YouTube, and on my channel, I've made a couple videos with people that I've encountered. I encountered this at grad school in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. Emerson College, which is my school, was widely just celebrating it. Made a video about that. Made a video recently about the death threats against Konstantin Kisin during his debate with Destiny. Made a recent video about Destiny having a conversation on his YouTube channel with its lead moderator saying, "I'm really alarmed at the amount of people in our community calling for assassination." And I don't think it's a joke, Destiny, is what he's saying to me. He's like trying to get through to him. And Destiny's like, yeah, we don't want that to happen because that would be a bad look. So he is getting worried about it because it would be a bad look for him. He understands that. But and his lead moderator, he's the guy who's most tuned into if you go on Destiny's Discord server, it's breakout room, and there's all these conversations happening. So if he's picking up on these patterns and trying to make it as clear as he can, and yet I understand Donald Trump is one flawed individual, and yet there's a plethora of flawed, and we're all flawed individuals, and we say stupid things, and sometimes it's like, dude, why are you saying this? Like the Rob Reiner thing, there's no excuse. But if the real topic of this conversation is what led to Charlie Kirk, what has led to 3 assassination attempts on one person, yes, all I can do is concede the ground and say, yeah, he's made stupid things. There is some weird editing in there, taking these little things that
right. It's a
punch
compilation
him in the face.
made by
Come
his
on,
haters.
Mike.
But I mean, I have verified
Yeah.
many of his comments over the years. Where, for example, I was just reading this before. Trump has called Adam Schiff and Pelosi, quote, the enemy within and more dangerous than our adversaries like China and Russia. He said of Schiff and others like him, quote, these
That's
are
not a
bad
call
people.
for violence.
They are Marxists and communists and fascists, and they're sick. I agree it's not a direct call to violence, but it's the same kind of extreme rhetoric and ad hominem that the Trump administration is saying incites violence. You see what I'm saying, Warren?
Yeah, I doubt he knows what fascism is. He probably shouldn't be using that term there either. There are some people, like you could say Hassan Piker is a communist or social. You wouldn't be that far off. I think he might even admit that. So there are places for these terms in our dialogue. But I mean, that's how I would. But I don't see how that I have no problem with him saying this is a real problem within that's even more paramount than, say, China. Like, you could even argue it's worse because it is coming from inside. And if Kamala Harris were to become president, these are the things that would concern me. I don't think that's going to lead to someone being killed like Charlie Kirk.
Well, but that's basically like the reverse of the opinion you have when it's coming at Republicans. Is like if you're excusing away like it's okay to call all of us communists and saying we're the enemy within.
I never said that. No, I said it's okay to call someone like Hassan Piker, who calls himself a socialist or a communist.
But socialism and communism are different things. I think it's worth pointing that out. But I'll also just note that like I'm a generally like pretty normie Dem. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a member of like pro business groups here in the city of Chicago. I get called a communist by Republicans all the time. So like they use that term to call everybody.
I'm not calling you a communist.
I didn't say that you were. I'm just saying it's like people throw those words around and like, so if I'm throwing
don't throw words around. That's what I was saying. Yeah, we shouldn't throw words around. That's why I just said Trump shouldn't probably throw around fascism like that, because I doubt he knows what it means.
But do you think it's okay, Warren, to label Democratic politicians the enemy within? You don't think that's dangerous the same way calling someone Nazi, fascist, Hitler is?
The context around that, you could say that, like what I just described, that where you could point to a politician and say, I really believe this is a problem that is even more paramount than China. Like they're within. You could even say this person is. I mean, there's just context is dependent with enemy. You're my political enemy. Like, I mean, it could be misused. It could be appropriately used.
I guess it's just they're not affording that context to all the Democrats they're complaining about. He said our heads should roll. He said we're hurting people. He said we're dangerous enemies of freedom. It's like, I just don't like the double standard here. I generally think people should chill out with the rhetoric, and they should, but also that anything short of an actual call for violence is not in fact a call for violence. I think once you start labeling words violence that are not directly calling for violence, it becomes kind of a slippery slope towards censorship.
Okay, yes, fair enough. But if you're arguing that Trump is leading a Nazi movement, don't be surprised when people take violent resistance. You wouldn't disagree with that.
That no prominent Democratic politician has accused Donald Trump of leading a Nazi movement. Like, that is not a thing. I'm sure you can find a
right, but you just described him as a fascist on this show.
I believe that Donald Trump is a fascist, acts as a fascist. It's different than calling him a Nazi. You do understand that not every fascist is a Nazi, correct?
I'm the one who described the difference between how people are that use fascism.
I understand, but like, look, I want to just make a couple of points, if that's okay, Brad.
Sure. I will just say I do think there are some high-profile Democratic politicians who've directly compared Trump to Hitler.
Do you think Elon Musk did a Nazi salute?
I mean, I think he did it. Bill Burr described it as an accidental Sieg Heil. So I don't know. When you see a politician go like that, it's kind of hard.
So you think it's possible that Elon Musk was doing a Nazi salute on national TV?
Yeah, and I do think so. And I think the reason is because Elon Musk has kind of dipped himself in this like gamer mentality and culture, and there is a lot of doing that just for the bit. So I think it's possible.
Is it possible he did it? I'm not sure that it was intended as that, Warren, but I feel like there's a non-0% chance he did it to troll the libs.
I do think that's possible as well.
I don't think he's a Nazi.
It's possible.
I mean, right now conservatives are saying Graham Plattner did the same thing.
Case.
So
sorry. All right.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm. No, I think if we're being logical, I just think it's far the probability that he was doing a Nazi salute is far less likely than he is an awkward person with I forget his condition who's socially awkward.
I accept
who did
that. I accept that as
just like I don't know what to say, but.
I think that's a fine response. Like, if it's like, because Elon Musk is very socially awkward and weird.
I don't know what you're talking about. He seems so charismatic to me.
I did a podcast earlier today where somebody brought up Ashley St. Clair and her posts about sort of exposing the MAGA world, and somebody reminded me that she's one of Elon Musk's baby mamas.
Oh my gosh!
I felt it necessary to remind people that Elon Musk has all these kids through in vitro fertilization, because I believe that he's never had sex with a woman. He just doesn't act like somebody who's
exposing the MAGA world.
She's got all these. She's doing all these. You can look them up. All these TikTok videos where she's like, "I'm a former MAGA influencer." She's doing her makeup and she's talking about how the MAGA world works. I don't know how real they are, but they're fascinating.
The MAGA world works.
I don't know. I'm just telling you.
She's talking about like the influencer complex, and I have no idea if what she's saying is true or not. But I have seen some of those videos. Mike, before we move along here, was there another point you wanted to make?
Well, I just want to respond a little bit to the Karoline Leavitt thing that you posted or you shared with us a little while ago, because the different compilation of things that she brought up is like, I do believe Donald Trump is an existential crisis to American democracy, and I have lots of evidence to back that up, right? Like, he incited an insurrection on January 6th. They've been grabbing ballots all across the country because he wants to prove that he didn't really lose in 2020, which I think is both loser behavior and really bad for democracy. They're trying to pass all these laws to, they want to pass the SAVE Act to make it harder for people to register to vote. They are trying to gerrymander in the middle of the district, in the middle of the decade, so that they can make it harder for Democrats to win back the House. So like, I do think those are anti-democratic things.
Democrats are also gerrymandering.
Democrats are responding to what the Republicans did. Now, gerrymandering is terrible, and both parties have done it forever, but this mid-decade thing started with the Republicans in Texas. Democrats responded, and it's been a tit for tat ever since. But I do think like that's a real thing, and I think it's reasonable for people to say that. And then, she talked about heads need to roll, which you addressed, but like right before the White House Correspondents' Dinner, she used an aphorism too, which was shots are going to be fired in the middle of Trump's speech, and like,
which was also obviously just a phrase.
Exactly, 100%. But a lot of people on my side were being really stupid about it. They were going, well, she knew, she was leaving an Easter egg for us. And I'm like, no. But again, you set the standard, right? If I use the phrase heads to roll and I'm inciting violence, then you're inciting violence when you use the phrase shots fired, because that's a little bit closer to that. And then with the statement from Padilla where she said, Alex Padilla is saying that people are dying under this administration. Well, people are dying under this administration. There are people who are being kidnapped and torn away from their families under ICE or NICE, depending upon Donald Trump's changing the name to NICE today, because that's like the best idea that he has. It's really stupid. But people have died. Alex Preddy was murdered, I believe. Renee Good was murdered, I believe. I think the evidence of that is clear, especially for Alex Preddy, in my opinion. You have people who have died in ICE custody. You have people who don't know where their loved ones are. So you take stuff out of context.
People also died under President Biden from, people coming illegally into the country and going on to commit crimes. And Republicans highlighted that. and that wasn't incitement to violence either. So I think I get your point that simply accusing an administration of having led to deaths in directly or indirectly is not an incitement of violence. And it's actually something Republicans do to Democrats all the time. Sometimes I would, in ways that I view as at least somewhat substantiated, sometimes not. I mean, Warren, we just ran through a lot there, but is there anything you want to respond to?
I haven't heard anything yet.
What do you mean?
I haven't heard anything that I should respond to yet.
Okay. So I will move us along here, and we can talk about Jimmy Kimmel, obviously, because he made a joke that is not going over well with MAGA. So here is that joke that is now leading the president to call for Jimmy Kimmel to be fired and call on ABC/Disney to kick him to the curb. Here's the joke. And the context, by the way, is that he's doing like a mock White House Correspondents' Dinner as if, and then he's splicing in old footage of Melania and as if they were there, but they were not. So it's a skit. It's a bit. It's not actual footage. Take a look at this.
Our First Lady Melania is here. Look at Melania. So beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow.
So I don't find it funny. I think it's not particularly in good taste. But also, I've grown up basically agreeing with the right when they said, fuck your feelings, comedy is legal. And I do have that same energy for Jimmy Kimmel. Donald Trump does not. He wrote in a post on Truth Social a long rant about Jimmy Kimmel that concluded with, I appreciate that so many people are incensed by Kimmel's despicable call to violence and normally would not be responsive to anything he said, but this is something far beyond the pale. Jimmy Kimmel should be immediately fired by Disney and ABC. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, Semaphore is reporting that the FCC is looking to challenge ABC's broadcast licenses over this. So just my initial thought is that I didn't pick up on that joke as a call for assassination. I read it as a joke to suggest that Trump is old and might die and that Melania hates him and hates her husband and will be happy, like the glow of an expectant widow. It's not funny to me. I don't really get the joke, but I did not interpret it as a call to violence. Warren, do you?
No, I think it's probably what you're describing. When I first saw it, it was being played after this assassination attempt, so it sounded as though he was making a joke that you're changing the context, in which case it does sound like a call to violence. So,
but maybe it happened before the attempt.
I understand. Yeah. So maybe it's a political expedient move for Trump. I mean, I have no doubt he really doesn't. I personally do not like Jimmy Kimmel either. I do not think this has anything to do with whether or not comedy is legal or illegal. To say that you think he should be fired, the argument, I believe, is that this is a step too far. It's poor taste to joke about anyone's death, regardless of whether it's assassination or dying of old age.
Is it though? We joke about death all the time. Yeah. Comedians joke about the Holocaust.
I'm not saying you can't
AIDS.
Joke about death. That has nothing to do with whether you can or can't do it, about whether or not I feel or many feel that it's in poor taste to joke about the president.
You can feel it's in poor taste. But he's the president of the United States,
no one's saying
threatening government retaliation with their
licenses.
How's
he threatening government? He's saying
taking away their licenses potentially and demanding
that was the FCC earlier. That was a whole nother story, though.
The FCC,
but that's the
with
same
his
story,
appointee,
though.
Brendan Carr.
Is he calling for the FCC now?
Yes.
Or is he asking for him to be fired?
Both.
So Donald Trump and Melania Trump are calling for Jimmy Kimmel to be fired, and then at the same time, the FCC is moving to do an early review of the broadcasting licenses for ABC.
Okay, so I don't know if Trump is maneuvering the FCC, is my point.
I mean, it's his political appointee.
Is. Right. So, it is absolutely a coordinated attempt to target Disney and ABC.
The FCC also has all time they could be making a maneuver, and that doesn't mean it's being directed by Trump.
There is no autonomy in this administration, Warren. I'm sorry. Like the DOJ works at Donald Trump's request. The FCC works at Donald Trump's request.
This is a matter of logic. Logically, they could be moving it with autonomy. It has nothing to do with your feelings about it.
But but an administration is accountable.
Have you watched the way this administration operates? I mean, they just indicted James Comey again for like the fifth time, and it'll fail again.
So that's subjective, your measurement of a situation is my point.
Okay.
The FCC
with
logically
all
could be
respect, I
moving.
think it's a little naive to think that this administration isn't operating
It's
that
not
way.
a matter of, it's just how logic works.
You can shout logic at me all you want, but it doesn't change what I can see
The
with my own
FCC
eyes.
has the logical ability to be making this move autonomously. That's not a matter of opinion.
So you believe that they're making this move autonomously?
This has nothing to do with what I believe. I'm talking about
we're
whether
having
it's
a debate
logically...
about what we believe in. I feel like it's reasonable for me to ask
No,
that
I was just
question.
making a point.
Okay.
Okay, Warren, but let me get clarity on this, though.
Of it.
So the same way, like Donald Trump appoints, well, actually, I think Brendan Carr was there before, but he may have been appointed by Trump in his first term. But regardless,
I believe that's right.
he appoints people to lead the FCC the same way that President Biden appointed DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who's then his failures on the border President Biden was blamed for, right? When you staff up your administration, the buck stops with you. You are responsible for the people you put in those positions of power, and then the decisions they make. So it seems fair to me to hold President Trump accountable for what Brendan Carr is doing.
Yeah, no, it could be.
We
We might be honing in on something we're kind of splitting hairs. So, for example, Brad, I could hire you to be, or I could appoint you in my administration. Then you could make a decision on your own about Jimmy Kimmel, and I could have nothing to do with it. And does that mean, but Warren is forcing this through? That's my point. Is that could be the situation, even though I appointed Brad into his position. That's all I'm saying here.
I think
that's
that
not
what you're
disputable.
describing is possible. It just doesn't seem like that's what's happening. Given the
it might not
president
be.
being
I
vocal
wasn't
about
trying to make I don't know. I wasn't trying to make a call on whether or not I was just trying to acknowledge that it could be, and suddenly it was
So
like,
I
no,
do wonder,
you're a fool for saying that.
Warren, do you remember the Twitter files story from the Biden administration?
Do I remember the Twitter file? No.
So essentially, there were these revelations that came out that were reported after Elon Musk took over Twitter.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Where they revealed a bunch of essentially pressure campaigns to take down posts. And the Biden administration was telling Twitter, this post, you should take this down. This violates these rules. And I thought that was an improper role for the government. And Republicans at the time argued that was censorship, and it was a pressure campaign to get a private platform to censor speech. It was arguably a First Amendment violation, many of them argued, Republican politicians. And I was sympathetic to those complaints. But now many of those same people are cheering on a president
I understand your point.
Explicitly demanding a private company fire
And I think the concern is that many people are viewing that as a call for violence, as many people, because we don't know what Jimmy Kimmel meant by that. I tend to agree with you. It was probably a joke towards old age, but some will have the opinion that it does sound really bad. The more I thought about it, the more I came around to what you're describing. But at first I was thinking, wow, that's like even worse than, I was hesitant to even say this, but to me it was like worse than what he was saying about Charlie Kirk, because it almost sounds like you're actually joking about the death. It's not just making a poorly worded comment in the wake of death. It was,
I get what you're saying,
again,
but even
the
if
parameters
it was
of
that,
free speech end at calls for
joking
violence.
about death is free speech.
Calls for violence is what I'm describing. I'm trying to, some people, this is where so free speech has legal parameters. One of those legal parameters is calling for violence. So if the FCC were to make the legal ruling essentially on that they could make a case like, you are calling for, they could take action given that parameter, and it wouldn't be the equivalent of trying to compare this to Twitter censorship.
Yeah,
broadly,
I don't think
views.
that anything could meet the very high legal threshold for incitement to violence that Jimmy Kimmel said or could have been.
I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it should or is, but I think that's the argument, and it does sound really bad. Like,
I mean, I agree. It sounds bad. It's a poor joke and poor taste.
I wouldn't be surprised if they fire him. If I were them, I'd fire him. I think he's.
I think
he's
now they
a
shouldn't,
walking hazard
because they shouldn't cave to the pressure from Trump. I think he sucks, and in another context, I would support him firing. Mike, I want to bring you in here. Sorry.
Yeah, well, one, I've never watched an episode of Jimmy Kimmel's show in my entire life, so I want to state up front, I'm not a huge Jimmy Kimmel fan either. I was always a Conan guy, and preferred his brand of comedy. But I mean, look, it's a joke. All right, that's it. Like, I thought that the left looked really stupid for a long time policing what comedians wanted to say in their stand-up acts. And I think if you want to go enjoy Joe Rogan, if you want to go enjoy Shane Gillis or Theo Von, like go enjoy it. And if you don't like it, turn the damn TV off. And I think that's the same thing here. Is I think this segment aired it was Thursday night, I believe, but it might have been Friday. But I believe it was Thursday. Nobody was offended by that joke until they discovered it Monday morning and decided to use it as, I believe, a layup so that they could have the FCC move up with an excuse to try to get ABC's licenses taken away. Like, that's what this is. And I think what annoys the hell out of me in this moment is we have this incident on Saturday. We're not having, this is a good faith conversation, but broadly, we're not having a good faith conversation about political violence and rhetoric in America today, writ large to the corporate media and then the conversation on X and elsewhere. But what are we doing? All of DC is moving ahead with the stupid ballroom convo. So like now you've got multiple members of Congress introducing legislation today to build the ballroom with taxpayer dollars, might I add. We're got the president of the United States and the first lady attacking a comedian for a stupid joke that they made. They've made that their entire personality. I told you this before we went on stream. Donald Trump's putting his face on the passport. Look how quickly they move to do the stuff that Donald Trump really wants to do. And in Trump's Washington, nothing even is attempted at getting done to improve regular people's lives. And if you just look at the polling, whether it's from a conservative site or a liberal source or somebody in between.
Hang on, Mike. There's plenty of things the Trump administration has tried to do that they believe will improve.
Like what?
Trump.
Like what are they doing? What are they doing right now?
Trump bonds, closing the border.
But
tax cuts, enshrining tax
cuts. But the tax cuts for billionaires mostly, because they did do tax.
They also
and no tax on
enshrined
tips.
middle and working class income tax cuts as well.
Well, those are any tax cut that anybody under, I forget exactly what the threshold was, is temporary. I want to point that out. But the American people aren't feeling it. So like that was something they did.
Nothing though.
Well,
they're doing nothing to help the working people.
But what
that's
are they doing?
partisan.
No,
that's a very partisan.
That's fine.
Analysis.
That's fine. I mean, I'm a Democratic strategist, so like you get what you pay for. But like, which is nothing, by the way, because I'm not being paid to be here. But like, it's they passed the budget almost a year ago now. And every aspect of the economy is significantly worse. And my point is, all of Washington works to appease one man, Donald Trump. They're introducing legislation today to kiss his ass and push the ballroom forward because that's what he wants. They've got no idea on how to deal with inflation, no idea on how to deal with the war, no idea nothing on gas prices. Like, this is not a great situation. And everything that's happening right now is all about pleasing Trump. There's money for the ballroom, but we can't pass the ACA subsidies at the end of the year. That would have prevented
peanuts, though. That's in the numerical value of the ballroom versus
the numeric. It's but okay. Well, let me equate it to this. It's $400 million to build the ballroom. I accept that. It's billions of dollars to extend the ACA subsidies, but we spend that basically every week in the war in Iran right now. So that money is lying around somewhere. So my point is, everything that happens in Washington is about enriching him and protecting him. There's nothing going on elsewhere for the American
back
people.
To Jimmy
and that's why his
Kimmel,
approval
though,
rating is at 30%.
well,
Sorry.
Warren, I want to give you the opportunity to respond if you'd like.
No, that's cool. That's
Okay.
fine. I honestly, these kind of conversations interest me less than what the first topic we were getting into, because Trump, he does a lot of things I disagree with, and just this is bad. I mean, I'm sure that, Mike, this is more your realm as a political strategist. I don't consider myself a political expert by any means, but so I don't have much comment on this topic.
I will say every now and again there's something that Trump does that I like reclassifying marijuana last week. I thought was a good idea.
So I guess what I'll ask, though, is this was interesting because I made the point on Twitter, Mike, and I should never tweet. I always tell myself I get nothing out of tweeting, but I can't help it. I made the point that I thought it was hypocritical for Republicans to demand Kimmel's firing after all the cancel culture kind of narrative, we support comedians, all this. And Megyn Kelly responded to me with an interesting take, right? She said what we're doing is holding Kimmel and ABC accountable to their own standards. And she pointed out a situation that I was not familiar with, which I guess I'd just forgotten about. ABC previously fired the host of The Bachelor, or quietly pushed him out, Chris Harrison, simply for defending a contestant who had once attended an antebellum-themed party, like a Southern slave-era party. And so he made some comments suggesting that we should give that woman grace, and it's in her past, and all this. And he was unceremoniously kicked to the curb for, like, defending racism or whatever, which I don't think is what he was doing. But then you look at this, you look at Roseanne Barr, it's like ABC has set the precedent that they fire people quite lightly for saying or doing offensive things. But now that it's Kimmel being offensive to Trump, they don't have that same standard. Is that not a fair point in terms of consistency on their end?
So a couple things. I don't know anything about the Bachelor story. I don't recall that in the slightest. So I'm just ignorant on that one. I'm sorry. The Roseanne Barr one, she tweeted a racial slur against Valerie Jarrett and then
What was the
doubled
racial
down on it
slur?
repeatedly. I think she called her it was about
I
being
have
a
the
monk.
tweet here. On May 28th, 2018, Barr tweeted, now deleted, quote, Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes had a baby equals Valerie Jarrett, who is, of course, a black former senior advisor to President
I would say,
Obama. I mean, that's a racist insult. Yes, I would agree.
Yeah. So, like, again, I think that's what she got fired for. And the conservative movement continues to, for whatever reason, defend Roseanne, which feels like a hill not worth dying on to me. But I think that one, and I've made this point 1,000 times, liberals also don't like it sometimes because when there were all the people who were tweeting stupid shit about Charlie Kirk's assassination and being like, oh, glad he's dead or stuff like that. And those people got fired from their jobs when Libs of TikTok was going after them. And I think it's gross when people target people that way, but like you have the right to say whatever you want, but you're not immune to the consequences of it. If your employer is uncomfortable with what you have said or you are a detriment to the business, you will be fired, like period. So if Jimmy Kimmel is no longer a value add to ABC, he'll get fired. The problem is all the people who are mad at him are not Jimmy Kimmel's audience, and ABC knows this is a bad faith attack designed to justify them removing their broadcasting licenses. So ABC and Disney are probably not going to acquiesce here, but really that's a business decision. And again, I just don't think we should be policing the jokes that comedians are making on their show. Like, you don't like Jimmy Kimmel, that's fine. You have the right to not like him. Go turn on whoever you like. If you want to go watch Jimmy Falala, what's his name on Fox News, right? Like
Failla, I think.
Failla, okay.
I don't know.
Piers Morgan once told me he's the best comedian in America today, and I've never heard a single joke that Jimmy's ever told. But it's just, I just think that a lot of people are looking for a reason to be mad online and to cancel somebody because they disagree with them. And let's assume that the version of events you gave me on the Bachelorette stuff is correct. I do think like there was a time, a period of time where people were overcorrecting for stuff. And I believe the actress who played Erin on The Office, Kimmy Schmidt is how I remember her, because there was that show on Netflix that she had that my wife and I liked. She was in some kind of like beauty pageant thing that was like very Southern, and it was like, I remember somebody saying something like Daughters of the KKK. I know I'm getting this wrong, but like she was like 16 and people like tried to cancel her. And it was like she was 16 in a beauty pageant their mom probably put her into. Like, if the history of that beauty pageant is racist, that's possible. I don't know. But I just think people are looking for a reason to be mad. Now, that's different than the president of the United States escalating a feud with a comedian because he's thin skinned. But I think people do need to like chill out and stop going after each other for.
Listen, I agree and I appreciate that. And I'm not saying this applies to you, but it does feel like whiplash from many Democratic politicians, progressive activists, liberal media institutions 100%. Who cheered the cancel campaign for years. And now MAGA's like, well, fuck it, we're going to try to cancel you guys. And they're suddenly saying,
yeah, but my
free speech,
pushback, though,
legal comedy, all this stuff.
If you don't mind me pushing back on that, I mean, I've been pretty consistent on this over the years and like called a lot of it out during the Biden years. Now, I will say, because people do this sometimes when they hear me talk, I didn't become a public figure until like 3 or 4 months before the presidential election 2024. So if you're looking for my tweets, I didn't tweet at all during the Biden years. I just didn't. But I had a lot of conversations with my clients telling them to stop doing this shit. And I think that it's wrong. But cancel culture existed before we called it cancel culture, right? Like when the Dixie Chicks came out against the war in Iraq, the Bush administration and the Republican Party came out hard and tried to cancel them and probably derailed their careers.
It's horrible.
For like 10
but there was
years.
a huge surge, though. There was a huge surge in like 2018 to 2022, numerically.
I think because of the internet, I think just like scaled everything up significantly in that era. But like you're right that I think like, look, there are a lot of people on my side. There's a lot of people on the conservative side that love to use cancel culture, and they only complain about it when it's not working for them. And everybody should just let people have fun on the internet. If you don't like stuff, turn it off. I do think every now and again somebody's going to say something that crosses a line, and then it gets conflated with like the Matt Lauers and the Harvey Weinsteins of the world, where those guys deserve to be canceled and they deserve to go to prison for a lot of the things that they've done. Those things get combined, and that's not right either. So I just think people need to lighten the fuck up.
All right, Warren, any thoughts?
I saw the transformation. I don't think the transformation was because of the internet. I think it began in 2016 when Trump came into office, and I believe it was a whiplash. It was a response to that, and this sense that the West is in danger. Again, it's the same mentality, underlying ideology that I believe is leading to the violence that we're seeing today. The internet could exacerbate, but the internet pre-existed 2016. But I saw, and I was in graduate school at the time, and it was a radical transformation. And yeah, it was my experiences in graduate school that changed my entire view on the world and made me. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I didn't witness the things that I witnessed. So, but that's the only comment I think I have.
I would add here that there were, and I think the cultural backlash to Trump in 2016 played a huge role in both of these things. But there's things like Me Too, and then there's things like Gamergate, and those were, I think, happening around the same time as just a larger cultural shift. And I do think that then accelerated and escalated. Some of, and if not the majority of, the Me Too conversation was important in the wake of Trump's election, and the number of people like Harvey Weinstein and Matt Lauer who got caught up in that, deservedly so. What was the other the actor's name? Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey got caught up in that because he was abusing a young man, I believe. Right. And so those were important conversations and worth having. But then I think it started to spill over to where other people were like, we're ascendant on the stage and now we can just police whatever we want. And it just becomes too much, which then creates the backlash where now you have all of these comedians that are like, I could say the R word again. So it's great that Donald Trump got elected. And I just think that's like silly and immature too. But I'm not like freaking out every time I go to a comedy show and somebody uses a word that I don't like. I don't laugh, or I laugh, or I leave if I don't like it. Like, I went to Theo Von's show when he was in Chicago. I stayed for like half of it. I thought it was bad and I left. So, and I like Theo Von's podcast.
But that's just such different energy than like when progressives and Democrats like got mad at Bernie Sanders for going on Joe Rogan because Joe Rogan had like said transphobic things, as if there was like some sort of ridiculous transmutation effect whereby Bernie Sanders, by speaking to Joe Rogan, who of course had a massive audience you should want to reach as a politician, therefore was like endorsing him. I mean, that was a whole era of politics, mostly on the Democratic side, that I think was incredibly, incredibly toxic.
I agree with that completely. I will say that I think the Republicans now are the front runners of that toxicity, because I did a hit yesterday. I did a similar conversation with this that was polite, but Batya from News Nation was on me because Bernie Sanders had done a Hassan Piker's podcast or his stream on Twitch, and was then saying that everything that Hassan Piker had said reflected what Bernie Sanders said. And I was like, that's not how it works. Like, it doesn't transmute over there. You should go have conversations with people, even if you disagree with them. Like, it's been said 1,000 times, Kamala should have gone on Joe Rogan's show, and it's part of the reason she lost that she didn't.
I agree with you. Sure. Go ahead, Warren.
Oh, sure. Towards the beginning of the conversation, I believe you were talking about, and this is the tendency to say, there are no Democrat politicians who are pushing Hassan Piker's message, but we are. And I know there's the controversy because the establishment is kind of pushing back against him because they are afraid of this. They understand the danger of that. But there are the politicians that are endorsing it. And that's different, endorsing Hassan Piker, and that's different than just having a conversation with him.
Yeah, they're campaigning with him, some in Michigan.
Yeah, well, one candidate did, Abdul El-Dul in the Senate race did.
And I think if you're bringing someone on stage with you, Mike, that becomes more of an endorsement than just going on their stream.
I think campaigning with him was a mistake and it was wrong and bad for the party. And I've said that publicly already. I just think that we should be more willing as a society to tolerate having conversations with people that we disagree with. And like, I'll be honest with you, I hate Nick Fuentes. Okay. I hate him. I talk about him on my show all the time. I cover the things that he says on my YouTube channel. Can't stand that little guy. I think he's a little weasel. But if he called me tomorrow and said, come on my show and let's have a conversation, I would do it, even though I disagree with him. And there'd be a lot of people on my
conversation with him.
Did you? A lot of people on my side would be like, Mike, you're platforming Nick Fuentes. And I'm like, Nick Fuentes has a bigger platform than I do. I can't platform somebody who's smaller. I get yelled at for going on Newsmax and they go, you're legitimizing Newsmax. And I'm like, Newsmax is in the back of every cab in New York City. Okay. They have their little like thing that they have because they paid for the advertisement. Like, I can't do anything about that. I'm going to go where people are. And I just think more people should do that.
I think that's a much healthier attitude. And it's part of what I'm trying to do here with this panel. So thank you both so much for joining me. I appreciate both of you. And thanks for making the time.
Thank you, Brad.
Yeah,
thank you, Warren.
All right, guys, we're going to leave it there for this part of the debate. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you're subscribed, if you aren't yet, to this channel, Brad versus the World. Hit the like button, comment with your thoughts, let me know who else you want to see on the panels, and we'll be back for more real soon.